So this is my 100th YouTube video. I started this channel back in January 31st, 2017 because of a New Year's resolution to finally figure out how to make a video. The video is about fixing my tripod because my broken tripod is the excuse that I was using for years not to start my channel. I shot it on my cell phone and edited it in iMovie, and I uploaded it to YouTube. Fast forward 6 years, and now I'm a full-time content creator in a workshop that my YouTube channel built with the help of all of you. It was strangely intimidating to come up with a video plan for the 100th video. I wrote down a whole bunch of different ideas and looked over them, and one specifically stuck out. If I'm known for anything, I am known for pattern plywood, a technique I developed by cutting up plywood into strips and rearranging those strips into unique patterns. Hopefully you've seen one of those videos already, but if not, I'll post a link to a playlist. A while back, I made my family some pattern plywood serving boards that looked like mountain peaks with a walnut and maple starry sky background. I didn't film making them because I was in a hurry to get them done for the holidays, but I put a picture up on Instagram and people freaked out over them. It was my #1 post of the year, and a sea of comments came in, people asking how they were made and if I had any plan to sell them. I was excited, but I also knew that I made a huge mistake. I should have filmed it and made like 30 of them. I still regret it to this day, but for my 100th video, I'm gonna fix that problem and make them again. The patterns I'm going to be making use a walnut accent, and in order for the walnut to fit properly, I need to thickness it to the exact same size as the Baltic birch plywood. It's just a matter of quickly running it through the table saw and checking the fit until I got it just right. I'm going to be making 2 patterns here, the woven squares and the alpine pattern, and that starts with a 45-degree angle cut on my table saw. The walnut pieces are only wide enough to make a single strip out of each piece, so I just ripped one side of those, but the plywood is wide enough so I can get multiple strips out of it. With a 45-degree angle on the outside edge, I can start making a couple measurements. Basically, I'm gonna get 2 pieces out of every rip cut. I don't wanna switch back and forth between 90 and 45 degrees on my table saw, so I cut out 2 at a time and then allow a middle section of a 1/4 inch, which will be plenty of room for a curve cut later when I go to rip the strips in half. This will make a little bit more sense when you see it in a minute, but I can set up my table saw fence to that mark that I just made and then flip the board over and rip again and get a whole bunch of strips out of it. Now that I have those strips, I can square up my table saw blade and then make that second cut that I was talking about. I cut off 1 strip and then I flip around the scrap piece and cut that off too. This is the reason that I made the kerf so wide in the center, a 1/4 inch, because that gives me plenty of room to cut it twice to make sure they're exactly the same size. I also pass through the walnut pieces for the same reason, so everything is exactly the same. I cross-cut the strips because the scrap piece of plywood that I was using was a little bit on the long side, and then I tape the joints together. I just like using blue tape for this. It gets a nice tight joint, and it's easy to apply and remove later. With all the pieces prepped, I can start the glue up process. I'm using Titebond 3 on this because it's waterproof, and I like to let it soak a little bit into the fibers of the plywood. I actually put about 2 coats of the glue in there because it soaks in so much. I clamp it down with some rubber bands and clean up the insides so that I can register the pattern well. If I don't clean this up now, it's just a big pain later. Just so you guys know, I am making a limited run of these boards available on my website. So go check it out now if you're interested. They are being produced as we speak. So I'm going to continue the production if we sell more. So if it sells out, just make sure you hop on the email list and check that out. But they are available, almfab.com/store. I let the pieces sit overnight and came back the next morning to remove the rubber bands. After that, I could pull off the blue tape. As you can see, they're fairly clean, but they're gonna need a little bit of extra cleanup to make sure that they're glue-free for the next phase. Years ago, I bought this pack of mat cutter blades. It's for like cutting picture frame mats. They work great as mini card scrapers, but you have to be careful with them. Well, definitely just cut myself. Not too bad, don't worry about it. But I'm gonna switch over to a card scraper because that's safer. It's funny, I've used those things for years. That is the first time that I've cut myself with them, but apparently a card scraper works just as well, so I suggest going that route. I mentioned before that I'm making two patterns. One of them is going to be that alpine mountainscape pattern that you saw before. The other one is going to be this woven squares pattern, which is a personal favorite of mine. In order to do that, I'm going to take half of the strips that I made and glue in a stick of walnut to add that bit of contrast. I made these strips slightly oversized, and that is just so that I don't accidentally make them undersized. That would ruin the pattern, so I will trim them up at the end after the glue is dried. While I wait for the woven squares pieces to dry, I can start in on the alpine pattern and use my new bandsaw for that. I haven't really shown the new bandsaw much yet. I'm super excited about it. It's a Harvey bandsaw and it has a lot more rip capacity, which means I can do a lot more resawing. It also has twice the power of my old bandsaw, and it's got this great fence that flips down so I can still cut small pieces on it. The old hopper that I used for the dragon scale pattern plywood bowl video, I still have it kicking around and seemed to fit the new bandsaw just fine, but eventually I feel like I need to make a nicer one. I set the fence a little bit larger than 3/4 of an inch so I have some sanding room, and then I can square up the end of the log. After that, I can batch out a bunch of tiles, and I like to have this backer block, which helps save my fingers, and it also keeps the tiles nice and square while I cut. And then, of course, I use the same setup to cut all the walnut tiles as well. Now it's time to start making the panel, and for that I used a pre-existing mold that I had from previous projects and started gluing the pieces up, making sure I pay very close attention and not mess up the pattern. It's really easy to do when you're putting this many pieces in, but as soon as I got the mountain peak established, I knew I was in good shape and could start cruising. For the most part, I've switched over to using wedges to clamp these panels up. It's more efficient, it's easier, you get more pressure, but for this one, I decided to be lazy and go with a mold that I already had, which didn't have enough room for wedges. And not to give anything away, but it was a bad decision. While I waited for the first panel to dry, I could start in on the second now that those pieces were dry. Like I said, I need to trim off these edges, and I just did a rough trim with the table saw to get the bulk of the material off. And then I can do a nice cleanup pass with a template bit on my router table. Got a problem. I loosened up the clamps last night and then didn't check on it. I think it cupped, which happens. This is part of the reason that I switched over to using wedges, and I didn't use wedges this time because I already had a frame built for this size, a panel. But looking at it, that's really bad. That's not good. I mean, I don't think I could sand that out. We'll find out. So, I guess my laziness yesterday didn't pay off. Go figure. If you couldn't tell, I was pretty darn close to just scrapping this whole panel, but I figured I would give it a shot, see how thin it would get if I flattened it out. So I popped 36 grit sandpaper onto my drum sander. That is the coarsest sandpaper that I've ever put on this thing. And I just sanded and sanded and sanded, and eventually I got it flat. In the end, it was actually only about a 30-second thinner than I wanted, so that wasn't too bad, and I really liked how the walnut came out, so I decided to stick with it. That said, I learned my lesson with that first panel and rebuilt this jig so that I could put wedges in it instead and make sure it didn't cup again. Now it was just a matter of gluing up all the pieces. The cool thing about this pattern is actually there's a bunch of different patterns you can get out of the same tile, and I featured that in a previous video. So if you're interested in seeing the different variations of this tile, it's honestly pretty cool, and I'll post a link right here. The wedge method on these panels is far superior. You can see if it starts to lift up. You have complete access to the panel, so you can kind of smack pieces down. You also can get a lot more tension on the glue up, so you get tighter joints. So I'm celebrating more than one thing for video 100. I'm also celebrating the launch of my storefront. I've been working tirelessly behind the scenes to put together an official merch site on almfab.com where before this, I was working with auto fulfillment sites, and I wasn't super satisfied with the quality or the user experience, and I really want to support small businesses when I make my merch. So you may have noticed the Dragon Scale pattern plywood hat. This is up on the store now. It's made by Kyle over at Ink and Emblem. We've been working together for a while now, and I'm excited. We're gonna introduce more designs and beanies and stuff, but this is the first one, and I'm so happy with it. I've also been working with Foundation Press on the t-shirts and sweatshirts. Look at these things. They're just super high quality. I've been wearing this for the last couple weeks, and I love it, and I'm just so much happier with the quality of my merch. I've also got stickers up there that I designed myself. There's lots of things, so go check out the store. You can also, obviously the serving boards are up there as well. I've been working really hard on this, and I hope people enjoy it. I hope you get some cool merch for the holidays, and thank you for supporting my merch and supporting small businesses. Appreciate it. The second panel came out great. I love this pattern. I just like that it's kind of like an optical illusion of these squares interweaving with each other, although it doesn't really shine until you actually sand it up. Both panels are now flattened and sanded, but there's still more details to add. One of the details that I added to the original Alpine serving board are these stars. They're made with maple wood dowels and a couple different size holes that get drilled into the walnut sky. These little dowels are so thin that I find that the best way to cut them is with a pull saw. Other tools that I've tried, like the bandsaw, just tend to break them apart, or it kind of feels a little bit sketchy because they're so small. Once cut, I can hammer in the dowels. I apply a little bit of wood glue to the inside of the hole using a toothpick, and then I can hammer the dowel into place. I want to be really careful about squeeze out on this because too much glue squeeze out will get absorbed into the end grain of the wood and makes it hard to apply finish later. And as easy as that, I've got a starry sky. So now it's time to trim up the edges and cut the panels to the right size. Use a track saw to trim off the first edge. And then I bring it over to the table saw and square up the other 3 sides. I like to take a conservative cut in the beginning and then slowly sneak up on it until I've removed all the sort of inconsistencies from the glue up. The other panel may look like it doesn't need much because it's already square, but it did need to be trimmed on each side just to get rid of any glue squeeze out and make sure all the angles are square. I used a washer to trace a radius on all 4 corners of both boards. Then I brought them over to the sander and sanded them up to that line. Over at my Rockler ProLift router table, I swapped out the template bit for a roundover bit and prepped to round over the edges of both of the boards. In my previous video, I introduced you guys to the new Glowforge in the shop. I'm super excited to have this. There's loads of different things that it's helpful with, and one of them is going to be applying my logo to my projects. I put a piece of ashwood covered in tape to prevent too much charring into the Glowforge, and then in Adobe Illustrator, I drew up a logoed circle to use as my artwork to be cut by the tool. I then exported that as an SVG, scalable vector graphic, and brought that into the Glowforge app, where there was already a scan of the board that I put inside of the tool. I placed the graphic and pressed print. The logo looked like it came out clean, but I wasn't really sure until I took off the blue tape. It came out looking really nice and clean. The next thing I had to check for is to see if it would actually fit inside of a 1-inch hole. That's what I designed it for, so that I could just use a Forstner bit. But before I drill out the backside of the pattern plywood boards, I want to do a test fit. I noticed from other projects on the Glowforge that the laser can leave a little bit of a kerf, but when I fitted it into this test board, it fit great, so I felt like I was ready to just batch a couple more out. And now for the nerve-wracking bit of drilling out the boards that I just spent hours on. I slowly crept up on the cut, making sure that it sat at the right depth. Fortunately, the laser cut deep enough that if it was sitting a little bit high, I could sand it down. I also sanded the blackened edges to make sure that I get a good glue bond. After that, all I had to do was apply some glue and slip them into place. For the finish, I'm using Wood Honey by Total Boat. This is a penetrating oil finish that's food safe, non-toxic. You don't need to wear gloves to use it or anything like that. You just apply it liberally, let it get absorbed into the pores of the wood, and then you buff it off after about 20 minutes. This type of finish is great for serving boards because if it starts to get worn over time, multiple washes, I don't recommend putting this thing in a dishwasher, but hand washing, after a while it'll start to dull the finish and you just apply another coat. You don't have to sand it down or anything like that. The last step in the build is to add on some rubber feet to the bottom. I'm gonna be giving away these boards that I made in the video. This one is gonna go to the 100th purchase of merch on my website. That includes hats, sweatshirts, t-shirts, and boards. And this one is gonna go to a random drawing of people in the next 2 weeks who have purchased on the website. So that includes plans as well. Just to show my appreciation for you guys supporting me. I also wanted to mention that on the back, the emblem that I did with the laser cutter, I've been working on this project for months. So the emblem is going to be different in the first batch. I think moving forward, I am gonna do this, but if you get part of the first batch, you're gonna have an emblem a little bit more like that. It's just a cool way of knowing that you got the first set. And then yeah, moving forward, I'm gonna do this just because it's a little bit more consistent, easier to do. It doesn't look that much different. Big thank you for supporting the channel, buying my merch. I really appreciate it. It's been a lot of work behind the scenes to get to this point, and a huge thank you to my Patreon supporters. You guys are the best. You're literally the reason I've been able to get to 100 videos and make this my job. I really appreciate it. I appreciate you guys supporting a small business like mine and small businesses that make the stuff that I'm putting out on my website now. So thanks a lot, and I'll catch you on the next one.